Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Super honoured that you've chosen to spend time on this before even probably your second cup of coffee. My wife Sancha's pet or my dislike of these sorts of presentations is she said, at the end, I know nothing about the presenter. So, yep, I'm Jim Marshall. I'm 47 years old. Ouch. 2 kids. Miserable Ipswich Town fan. Favourite films are The Big Short, Matrix and La La Land. And my pet hate is reality TV, with one notable exception, and that's Alexandra Burke's Argentine Tango from 2017. This is how I spend my, this is my world, the Rocker Network. 95% of the activity that our little group of companies are involved in is B2B or B2B2C. Rocker Network is a modern matrix organization, and that's great from a sales perspective. We get to talk about strategy, people, product, brand, and technology. And if you have a customer that's not interested in any of those things, you've definitely got to worry about your sales technique. I'm personally passionate about building high-performing teams. Some of you will know from that the brands in front of you there that I founded alongside Sancha Marshall Wolf, a hiring and talent consultancy in 2017, which is led by Amber Hunt and her amazing team. At Rocker, where I spend a large part of my week, or the majority of my week, in fact, I help leaders build great people strategy, enabling them to realize their workforce vision and then massively turn the dial on their corporate goals. Sales teams, you won't be surprised, are often the focused. Come and help me with my underperforming sales team, they say. So I undertook from actually I said 6 months in the sort of pre-log. It's more like a year now of research, which revolved around a really short deck of open questions, and they were targeted at individuals we knew were successful B2B professionals. So the research had some flaws in that it was limited to our extended network, but it had a huge advantage, which with open questions, we were able to really drill down on the nuance of what made these individuals effective or their organizations effective. And we didn't end up with data that was simply 70% of people think. It's a huge topic. And what I've tried to do today in the 25-30 minutes we've got is concentrate on the really important messages. So the slide in front of you, I'm not sure this is original thinking, but it's a note that was pinged back by one of the respondees. And I'll just give you a second to read it. So I know far too many businesses that slog away with the first group, the group that are never ever going to buy from you, and equally far too many businesses who do not spend enough time loving the third group. The people who have bought from you before, or the people who are willing to refer you, or the people who are buying from you now are of course the pool that we need to be concentrating on and loving. So when we look at this landscape, for me, this is the landscape that many sales teams and sales processes were designed for. It's hard to identify a customer and it's hard to reach a customer, but it's a relatively simple set of engagement rules and there are limited channels for engagement. But yet our sales team work in this environment. Oddly, the landscape is not hard to identify our customers, and it's easy to reach our customers. We have numerous tools at our disposal, but it's congested, it's noisy, it's complex, and it's fast moving. And I think the point of today really is we just can't apply 20th century sales strategies to 21st century customers. And yet there are still plenty of shiny suited reps out there knocking on doors, banging the drum, and all of the sales adages we've heard. So we'll start with people. From the research, this was probably the most interesting feedback. There was almost a total lack of consensus on the traits that make a good business-to-business sales professional. And the answers varied wildly from a gregarious individual, someone who must have that X factor, right through to someone who's unassuming and cerebral. The two common traits pretty much through every answer were the ability to listen and intelligence or emotional intelligence. And I think the wheelie bin is so important in that, think before you speak, read before you think. If you're going to be an effective B2B sales professional, you've got to be interesting and you've got to be interested. The other third trait that came up in less of the respondees, but was still, I think, relevant, was a natural sense of curiosity. And the odd thing about that was the respondent who particularly highlighted that said, in most of our organizations, we hire people based on their natural sense of a curiosity. There's something attractive about it. And yet we then smash that curiosity out of them by drilling them on product and ways to sell, where the curiosity is actually a key trait for selling. Many of you will know hiring business-to-business sales professionals is a minefield, and we did a lot of chat around how you hire people. Great B2B sales professionals rarely move. They have an amazing pipeline, and they would need a really compelling reason to move to a new organization. This is a black book. For me, the black book of contacts is less relevant than it's ever been. Buyers move relatively frequently in organizations, and it's difficult to be authentic if one week you've been selling for a competitor and the following week you're selling for your new organization. When you do, if you do hire a really experienced B2B enterprise sales professional, and it is worth doing on occasions, then I would suggest what you're really buying is their credibility in the market rather than their book of contacts. And that credibility allows them to get to the new contacts that you're looking for more quickly. The real rub with hiring, I've jumped a slide too quickly. The real rub though with hiring really experienced sales professionals, and the respondees talked about this a lot, was the wrong person for the wrong job. And that is startups and scale ups. Even the most experienced salesperson can be lost at that level. They're used to a punchy brand, an army of support and collateral, and possibly not used to scrapping and hustling that you might need to do in a smaller organization. And the other thing we talked about in the questioning sessions were, what's the definition of success for a salesperson? And it was astonishing how many viewed having a nice meeting or being bought a cup of coffee or being treated well by the customer was a definition of success, despite the fact that nothing was actually sold on that day or indeed in the future. I've got the football coach with a bag of balls on the right there. I mentioned that. I remember watching a game of football a long time ago when Graham Taylor was England manager, and a young Nigel Clough was about to come on as a substitute. And Nigel Clough looked at Graham Taylor for strategy and direction. And Graham Taylor's words were something along the lines of, "Go on, Nigel, you know what to do. Just do your thing." And Nigel Clough looked totally puzzled at this. And I think it's the other mistake we make in sales. We hire expensive and shiny individuals, and we expect, because they're professionals, just to be able to go off and do their thing without putting around a real clear process and strategy that's unique to the organization. Unlike people, on process, the consensus was crystal clear. I didn't speak to a single person in sales who didn't say process is either important or vital or essential. And loads of organizations spend hours on the design and build of product or of service, but just expect sales to happen without spending hours on the design and build of process, tools, and assets. And again, I'll just give you a couple of moments to read through some of the stats from some individuals who know a bit about it. So before I started looking at sales teams in more detail, which was the best part of 3 years ago, I suppose, and you told me that only 9% of organizations follow effective sales process, I wouldn't have believed you. And having spent time working with sales teams, I'm now amazed that it's as high as 9% based on the ones that I've worked with. So let's have a little look at process. Literally the most successful salesperson I know, who is extraordinarily gregarious, X-factor individual. He's good fun, he's likable, he's passionate about the products he sells. I want to buy something off him as soon as he walks into the room. He gave me 1 or 2 word answers on most of my open questions until I asked about process, and he covered side after side of A4 in his answers. And it was all of those things listed down the left hand side of my slide and more. It was scientific in terms of defining the market size, defining the segments, all of those things listed. Who's the buyer? Who's the influencer? What's the trigger? When do we send this? When do we send that? How do we engage in an open conversation? How do we elicit pain points? And what surprised me was another respondee who equally successful, but I've always regarded as a bit of a chancer. Is exactly the same. Went into enormous detail. Their particular organisation used Medic, which I've put on the right hand side, but there are dozens of different processes or theories around sales. But what was clear was that the successful individuals were rigorous about the processes that they followed. A lot of successful, and I think it's part of the swagger, but a lot of successful sales individuals give the impression of winging it. And when you dig a bit deeper, they are far from winging it. My personal one in there in the middle on the left-hand side, referrals. I am an absolute one-trick pony. I live off referral strategy. And I could easily spend the whole of this session, in fact, the whole of the morning, talking about the best way of getting referrals and how to get referred into customers. Those of you who haven't heard me speak before, Roy Shepherd, Rapid Result Referrals. It's a small book. It's absolutely brilliant, and it will change your sales strategy around referral if you haven't read it. And then the other thing that was interesting was how much time these successful individuals spent on their wordsmithing. So one of the questions that came out was it was someone working for an enterprise, or one of the biggest PLCs, in fact, and they were talking about to a bank. And everybody's really pleased with how the meeting had gone, and everybody was, it was that exact definition of success. Everybody was smiling, everybody had a cup of coffee, everybody felt a good job had been done. And this individual asked the question that his team looked horrified about, which is, how many £1 million ticket items as an IT department have you bought in the past? And there was silence. And then the answer was, well, no, we've never spent £1 million on any single item. And afterwards, this individual said, we were pitching for a £3 million platform rebuild, and we had never, in terms of looking at whether this was a realistic deal, asked the size of their usual budget. And they would have been far better pitching something around the 300,000 or 400,000 mark in order to get a sale. And a lot talked about qualification. Salespeople are ineffective. Salespeople tend to be subservient and asking challenging or difficult questions around budget, spend cycle, sign off, decision makers, puts them in an uncomfortable space. But it's that qualification of, is this sale going to go anywhere, is utterly vital. And the reason why there are so many zombie deals in your CRM systems, deals that are talked about in every sales meeting, but never seems to get over the line, is largely due to a problem around qualification, which should be fairly early in the sales process. And I mentioned that kind of that wordsmithing and thinking about the questions, and I could probably write down 100 from my research. But one I particularly liked is to probably someone who's going to refer you within an organization. How can you get my organization noticed? And that's psychologically really clever. People like being asked for help. So how can you help me? And then there's something very non-threatening about getting me noticed, but there's also something very confident about getting me noticed, which is, if you get me noticed, I will have no problem closing this deal. So those sales professionals were really spent time thinking about the way they question their customers and the way they present their dialogue. And I put in the bottom right-hand corner of that slide, when we do the rocker work, I could pretty much tell you the two single areas of failure amongst process is around internal communications, and I don't know a business process where that doesn't come up, but the real one was opaque accountability. So not really understanding in the sales cycle who was responsible for what, and of course that makes it virtually difficult to measure success. And us sales professionals love hiding behind opaque accountability, and we're never to blame when a deal falls or fails to get over the line. When we talk about process, we can keep this super simple, and this is something that we talk about internally. So you'll probably all be familiar with this sales and marketing, or marketing and sales funnel, and I highlight it because there was lots of conversation around whether sales is just a numbers game. Sales is absolutely a numbers game, but it isn't just a numbers game. In that awareness space, if people do not know about you, they will not buy from you. And in this, I talk about cold calling being dead, which I believe it pretty much is. But that doesn't mean brave calling is not. And if we look at the funnel of success for our sales professionals, in that conversion space, there is a horrible amount of brave calling. It's I've got to pick up the phone to someone senior, an identified decision maker, and take this deal absolutely to them. Where I don't think there should be a lot of cold calling is in that awareness space. That's absolutely the space for marketing and presentations and other activities. But interestingly, the successful B2B sales professionals didn't view marketing stopping and sales starting. They absolutely got involved in all aspects of that funnel. So possibly more as a sort of wedge, less involved in awareness, more involved in consideration, absolutely totally involved in conversion and so on. But they very much understood the moving a customer through awareness, establishing arm's length trust, and then moving to converting them into a buying customer. Excuse me. And actually, interestingly, on that, one of the people I interviewed, who's a multi-millionaire off the back of his sales activity in financial services, I asked the question that what makes them different? Why are they successful when others not? And it was a boringly simple answer. He said that just do the simple things right. I actually reply to emails on time. I always get back to people. If I say I'm going to send out some collateral, it goes then. It's a rigorous follow of process and self-discipline. The other thing I would say about this funnel in the awareness space, do not underestimate the power of genuine research for accelerating people through the funnel. We'll talk about persuasion strategies, but getting your customers involved from an awareness perspective at a research level is really powerful. Okay, the funnel is a simple concept. In a PLC, it's complex. If you are going to properly map all the people, triggers, collateral, tools, the who's involved and the who's accountable, it's complex. This is a piece of work we did at Rocker for a customer. But absolutely, without good process, salespeople get distracted onto business tasks. I see all the time. In fact, if I speak to a salesperson, the number of times they say, I'm just putting together a deck, the amount of time spent just putting together a deck, but not necessarily following through on the brave calls or the harder parts of the sales process. Because it's complex, it doesn't mean that there has to be the same level of prescription, and it will depend on the nature of the customer and the product and the service. So just because you're following a process, it doesn't mean you are stamping out curiosity or you're stamping out the opportunity to listen to a customer. They are absolutely parts of the process, and if that's the way you're selling, they should be built in, establishing pain points and so on. So the advantage of this is you can get visibility and insight of a performance right across the process. There are clear data points. Successful B2B salespeople are hardworking, and they're ruthless with their self-discipline around this. And if it doesn't work, they actively seek to change it. So if the process is not giving the results, it's a change, a reassess, a test, move on. And then the final interesting thing, I haven't even included a slide on it because I asked a whole load of questions around the best sales tools to use. And the top salespeople were totally tool agnostic. They wanted a process and they wanted some tools that would help them, but they weren't obsessed with one particular. In general, there was a feeling that Salesforce was useful at scale and Pipedrive was a good tool at startup and scale up, but there were dozens mentioned. Within the Rocker Network, we've just hired an enterprise B2B sales professional, and pretty much the first thing he did alongside getting out there and talking to customers was making sure the process and the tool that we've invested in is humming for him, it's working for him, and it's making sure that his discipline and process is kept in place. Okay, this is the best photo I could find of an Eskimo or an Inuit, as we probably now should be termed, and I think we still hear alongside banging the drum, he or she could sell ice to the Eskimos. They probably couldn't. Most failures around sales were around brand and product, and to a person it was that most failures not around the person, it might be around the process, but all too often we're just pushing the wrong product to the wrong message, the wrong product to the wrong customer with the wrong message, and around product, in the same way as there's sometimes tension between marketing and sales, the tension between sales and product, there was lots of hasty generalization fallacy. We've built a product for one customer, and therefore the rest of our customer base will want it. And there's a lot. I mentioned earlier that research was a vital part of pulling people into the sales funnel. A lot of the successful organizations were not build, sell, research into why it's not selling. They were research with customers, sell to customers, and build accordingly. The other thing I was going to mention, I'm a huge Simon Sinek fan, as were a lot of the people I spoke to, actually. And there are issues with some of Simon's methodology, but as a rule, people do still buy from people, and telling people why you do something and who you are is far more powerful than telling them about what product you make or what service you provide. And there are other people on this call who are far stronger than me at the power of social selling. There's a really interesting piece where one individual has her name and her job title on LinkedIn, and also has "and Blue Peter badge holder." And it's almost to a person, people, when they first speak to her, will ask her what she got her Blue Peter badge in. The really cringeworthy start to the call where I told you a little bit about me, they are really important triggers. It's a really difficult thing to do, but I almost guarantee that the people I don't know, there would more likely be questions about that first bit of information. How can someone who likes The Matrix also like La La Land, or something about another dance on Strictly being better than Alexandra Burke's? People enjoy that people contact. Social selling is worth investigating, it's worth looking into, and it's worth investing in. And then in the world we now live in, absolutely, as part of that sales strategy, need to be looking at company values, corporate social responsibility, and how as an organization we come across in the supply chain. That's not to say messaging should be obsessed with it. The messaging of your organization should be around why you do what you do, how you do it, and then ultimately what products or services you might be offering. But the values of your business and your corporate social responsibility should absolutely be part of the sales message, and that's more and more the case. Okay, penultimate slide. So when we talked about nuance and abilities to sell and how people actually took people across the line, it was easily summed up by the work of Cialdini, actually. And of those of you who haven't explored this, for me it's definitely worth it. And you look at here the 6 areas of persuasion here, and I've probably started to use nearly all of these now, but we'll as I said, as with referral, would probably previously been a one or two trick pony, falling heavily in the reciprocation or liking space. But you can work on these as teams and as individual. So reciprocation is the classic. I do something for you, and do you know what? It's human nature. You want to do something for me. In the article I read, the example given there was, there's a homeless individual on the high street. He opens the door for a lady walking into Marks and Spencer's, and she buys a copy of the Big Issue from him. Would she have bought it if he hadn't opened the door? We're naturally programmed to help people who help us. Commitment and consistency. It's far easier to persuade someone to put a 30-mile-an-hour sign in their garden, blocking out their view of the countryside, if you've earlier got them involved in signing a petition to say we need the traffic to slow down in the village or in our street. Social proof are massively underused, and it drives B2B sales professionals nuts. People want to know that other people in their sector and competition are already using your services or your products. We feel comfortable buying something if we know that others, even if their competitors, are buying the very same thing. Liking always seems a really lame part of it, or but people do still buy from people, and alongside a sense of authority, being likable, referring as many people as are referred to you, being generally a good egg is super helpful in the sales space. That's being likable, not to be confused with being subservient, and reciprocation, not to be confused with giving stuff away. Being an authority on a topic, whether that be Andy Rogers in our own business on business design, or being the leading salesperson who understands predictive analytics. That's really helpful, being that go-to person for the customer. And then finally, scarcity. There's a really good example of a dentist in New York who was going mad, had a waiting room full of noisy kids, people shouting and throwing things, general disruption, and working 12 hours a day and not making a penny. And he closed his dentist practice, refitted the waiting room with widescreen TV and leather chairs, and decorated the whole place, and looked at his 200 potentially best spending customers and invited them by invite only to be part of his dental practice. And literally within months, that sense of scarcity had customers knocking on the door to want to be part of the practice, even though the price and rates were higher. When we talk about one thing I forgot to mention earlier, when we talk about having nice meetings and being with the customer, how important it is in that listening to actually understand what the customer wants. One of the other respondees explained that their sales team went out and eulogized about their product and genuinely loved their product and was super enthusiastic about it, but actually what the buyer cared about was reliability of supply chain, speed to market, invoicing, payment terms. And the product was almost secondary to that. So it's one thing I forgot, but it's just utterly vital that when we're dealing with buyers of our services, we empathise with what they're trying to buy rather than being really excited about what we've got to sell. I always take sales calls if I can. It's part of my awareness campaign. I know loads of you won't. I often try and reverse, as a matter of good humour, try and reverse sell something to the salesperson who's called me. But if they claim to be in my market space, they should have some social proof. And by the way, if they're amazing and about 1 in 100 is, I'll try and hire them. Good salespeople are really hard to come by. We've talked about 3 areas, I think, today, or I've talked about. It feels very one-way traffic on a Zoom call. People, process and tools. People, look, hammering on those curiosity, those strong sales professionals, they never stop learning. I can guarantee of the invites that I sent out, the strongest sales professionals will be on the call, and that those that aren't won't be. They're obsessive about wordsmithing. They're constantly wanting to know how to be better. They're constantly looking at how the competition and other people are doing. not from a jealousy perspective, but from a learning perspective. And the three, they're forensic in their thinking. You might think they're winging it, but they very rarely are. And there are three cardinal sins in the sales pace, and that's hiring the wrong person, giving them the wrong skill set, and even if they're super experienced, not supporting them correctly. Process. It is all about process, and I know it's dull, and some of you will come, of course. Well, yeah, I already knew that, but it's amazing on that 9% how many people know the process is vital, but spend hundreds of thousands on sales teams' salaries and very little time and investment really getting the process well designed and tested. Tools, they just support the right people in the right process effectively. So let's think about with B2B sales teams: design, test, effort, detail, consistency, and accountability throughout the sales cycle. Thank you very much for listening. My email address and mobile is there. I'm super hungry for feedback. I won't send you a Survey Monkey form, but if you have time, 2 minutes to drop me an email, let me know what was helpful. And more importantly, let me know what I've missed. Let me know what you agreed with, but more importantly, let me know what you disagree with. And in terms of seeing if the scarcity persuasion works, the first 3 people to drop me an email entitled B2B help will receive a free 2.5-hour high-level B2B sales auditing meeting. Far more important than being the B2B help, though, please do drop me that feedback, and thank you ever so much for listening.